Good morning to all and warm welcome to Baiju's exam prep. Apologies that we delayed for 15 minutes because of some technical issues. Current issues were there. As you know, there is a shortage of water in Bangalore and other perspectives were there. So apologies for delaying for 15 minutes. So welcome to all of you for the disaster management class. Right. Now, when we talk about disaster management, so before that, hope I am audible as well as visible to you all. Please confirm. Done. Okay, so we'll start this disaster management. Now, when we talk about the disaster management perspectives, yes, there will be continuation of the classes. There was some technical issue, so you don't have to worry about the disaster management class. So it will be as per the schedule. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday you are having off. Then Thursday, Friday, and Monday I'll complete the syllabus of disaster management. No, you don't have to worry about that. So that 5 days I'll complete the class. Now, when we talk about this disaster management, always remember that in the context of disaster management, you should always remember that geography plays an important role. The basics of geography are very, very important. Plus concepts are needed here. So basics plus concepts of geography are very important here. Like cyclones, where they produce, where they develop, lands, which type of lands you are having, whether it is a mountain area, whether it is a plain area, or regional geography, or we say regional approach. Now, what do you mean by regional approach? It is about the spatial perspectives, the local people in that area, economic activity in that area. So we refer them as the regional approach. The local people involved, economic activities like agriculture, mining activities, etc. So always remember, regional approach is taken into consideration, right? So you have to be knowing about the region very carefully, like what is the population density in that area, whether it is highly densely populated or whether it is sparsely densely populated, right? Apart from that, economic activities in that areas, what type of economic activities are there, whether it is an industry based, whether it is an agriculture based, or whether it is something which is service oriented. So you should be good enough in knowing what type of economic activities are there in that region. So this you should keep in the mind. Plus, about the landform of that area, whether it is a plain area, slopes, mountainous terrain, plateau, desert areas, etc. So you should be very good enough in understanding that whether it is a mountain region or whether it is a desert area, etc. So that you will have some rough idea about the geography, the economic activity, the population activities in that region. So that will help you to understand and link that with your disaster perspectives. Apart from that, you should be good enough in knowing the environmental perspectives, ecology and environment. Now, here we have already completed the global warming and climate change perspectives. We discussed about pollution. So all those aspects are important here. The present condition of environment. And you should be good enough in knowing the terms here, like global warming, adaptation, mitigation, cloud bursting, etc. So these terms will help you to understand the basic perspectives of disaster. Apart from these two, you have to be very keen and very good enough in understanding the current affairs. Now, current affairs plays an important role here, because in the current affairs, we always read about the development which has taken place in S&T, development which has taken place in science and technologies. And these plays very important role in disaster management. They play very important role in disaster management. And also many such events which plays significant role here. Rahul fan burner, which plays very important role here. For example, if you take about the Nisar, which is in the news. Now, what is NISAR? NISAR is synthetic aperture radar, SAR, synthetic aperture radar. And this has been formed, or this has been due to the collaboration of ISRO and NASA. And this satellite will be launched maybe in next month or after that. So this will give more insight about the landforms, the ice. It will give also inputs about the earthquakes, volcanic activities, something which plays an important role in early warning system. Early warning system. Right. So you should be good enough in knowing these type of terms in your current affairs. These types of terms in your current affairs. Right. So NISAR, certain terms are very, very important. Right. So you should be good enough in knowing these things. Right. Apart from that, new technologies may have introduced there. New technologies may have introduced there. Example again, you can take a reference of in Gujarat to reduce the impact of urban floods and to make groundwater harvesting. They are increasing use of many types of the construction activities, like use of eco blocks. So it is a technology which will help in reducing the impact of a disaster. Now we refer them as innovations which are needed. Innovations which are needed. Or sometimes a unique method is also taken in the context of reducing the impact of any events there. So you should always update the current affairs. Always update the current affairs. So one is concepts of geography, then good enough in applications of geography plus environmental part, then current affairs. Always update that. Always update your current affairs. Plus, you should always focus on diagrams. Plus, charts are very important here. Flow charts or Venn diagrams. Flow chart or Venn diagrams are very, very important, which can help you to score good marks here. And when I say diagram, maps are important, or diagram about any such definition or any such concept you want to show. So these things you should keep in the mind. And overall, I say disaster management is linking the topics of geography, environment, and current affairs. I'm repeating, it is linking the topics of geography, environment, and current affairs with basic common sense. With basic common sense. Is that clear? Now, when we say the approach and how you have to move here, so it can depend on the PPTs. Whatever PPTs are there, they will help you to make a reference of the flow. Plus, you can depend on NCERT textbook, which will give you the basics, but not the detail. Disaster management of NCERT will give you certain basic definitions. Plus, you should access to the website, which is of National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA website. Right. So if you focus on these three, then I don't think you will have any problem in answering disaster management questions in your UPSC mains perspectives. Right. Now, this is how you have to make a strategy and approach in the context of disaster management. Right. So class 11th and class 12th geography, and you have a separate chapter called as disaster management. So you can pick up from that topic. Now next, when we talk about, yes, this is only for the main, sometimes you can get prelims also. it is mains. Sometimes you will get question from prelims also. Nowadays, you can't say that prelims is separate from mains. So when you are preparing for your UPSC exam, Stephen, don't separate them as prelims and mains. It's a sincere advice that never make a preparation keeping prelims as separate and mains as a separate. You prepare that as an integrated approach, so that concepts and if any basics are also asked, you should be good enough in that. Never prepare that as prelims separately and main separately. You keep a strategy of integrated one. Class 11th and 12th will suffice us. Class 11th and 12th NCRT. Now, here in this 5 days, we will be discussing something about the disaster management, certain terms which are very important. Terms which are very, very important. Generally, we say definitions. And there is a very thin line of demarcation between one term to another term. You don't find that they are different entities. Many times they overlap with each other. So you have to understand them in a very clear-cut methodology. Then different type of disasters and vulnerabilities we have to read. Then the cycle, international approach called as Sendai framework, international approach, then disaster management in India. So these are the topics which I'll be taking in the 5 days perspectives, right? Now, we always come across the two terms called as disaster and hazard. So there is always an ambiguity between these two terms. What is disaster and what is hazard? Now understand here in a very simple part. If any type of catastrophic event, the moment when we use the term catastrophic, it means it is sudden. It is sudden. So I'm giving the meaning also. You can use the words appropriately. So when you are writing in UPSC mains, you should not use the term sudden. You should use the term catastrophic. Sudden is for your understanding. So vocabulary plays an important role. Vocabulary plays an important role. So any event which is catastrophic, example, it can be earthquake or it can be bomb blast. Now here when we say earthquake and bomb blast, we find the events are performed by one is man-made and one is natural. So earthquake is natural. It's a natural event. Whereas the bomb, we refer that as man-made. Right. So I'm giving an example. Earthquake, it can be landslide also. Now, these events, catastrophic events, natural or man-made, when they occur in places. Now again, these have occurred in two different places. Right. Now here we can take an example of earthquake, which has occurred one in a desert or where the population is very less. And the earthquake which has occurred in habitation or settlements, which has occurred in the areas where large amount of human settlements are there. Habitations are there. With economic activities. Now, whenever the events takes place, so it will always create losses. And these losses are referred as socio-economic losses. We refer them as socio-economic losses. So these can be in the terms of injuries, deaths, loss of property. It can be in the form of injury, in the form of death, or in the form of loss of property. Loss of properties. So both events will create losses. But in the desert, we find the losses are comparatively lesser. Only the environment degradation will be there, or few people can be affected by that. So the degree of losses here is less. Degree of loss here is comparatively less because of its regional approach, and because of its geographical location. But when you take the human settlements, so here we find the same event if takes place, then the degree of losses will be very high. The degree of loss will be very high. Now, what degree of losses we are talking? So the moment when we say the term degree of losses are very high, it means that the losses are so huge. The losses are so huge that the local people are unable to cope up the condition or situation with their own resources. Huge. So that the local people are unable to handle or cope up the situation with their own resources. With their own resources. Now, what does resources mean? Resources means money, food, medicine. All these we refer them as resources, anything which provides economic benefit. So two conditions I have explained. One is where the local people are unable to handle the condition, handle the situation with their own resources, and to cope up the situation, to handle the situation, they need external help. They need external help. External help. So such conditions, when they are unable to handle the situations with their own resources, maybe food, maybe water, maybe shelters, maybe something which is there, and we refer that as a disaster. So this condition is referred as disaster. Disaster. And where we find the losses are less comparatively, we refer this as hazard. We compare that as hazard. So all the hazards are not disasters, but those hazards where the degree of losses is so high that the local people are unable to cope up, handle the situation with their available medicine, available money, available food, available water, then the losses will be very huge, and we refer that as a disaster. Right. So this becomes the definition of disaster. So any catastrophic event which can be man-made or natural or man-made, or by negligence, which results in substantial losses of the life, and where they are unable to handle the situation, we refer that as a disaster. Yes, hazard will take place in the settlements. Yes, it will be there. So understand the difference, that if they can handle the situation, then we call that as a hazard. Now, the idea of disaster management is not to convert the hazard into a disaster. So that is where you can understand that. The major motto of disaster management is that any event, any hazard which has occurred should not be converted into a disaster. You keep them as a hazard only, so that the people, the local, can accommodate themselves in the condition. So that is the major idea or motto of disaster management, so that the hazard should not be converted into a disaster. I hope it is clear now. Right. Now, hazards can take place in the settlements also, but it is the degree of losses which separates them from a hazard to the disaster point. Right. So calamity or a catastrophe that can cause huge loss of life and property. So this is as per the definition of Disaster Management Act of 2005. We'll take up that later. Or we say a serious disruption in the functioning of a community, where it makes huge impact on all the fabrics of societies, where they're unable to handle the situation with their own resources. We refer that as a disaster. So please remember this. So it is inability to handle the situation, inability to cope up with the situation. We refer that as a disaster. Is that clear? Okay. Now, next is the magnitude, intensity, frequency, and the damages caused by natural disasters have increased. Now, what do you mean by magnitude? What do you mean by intensity? And what do you mean by frequency? So, magnitude means the areas are increased now. The area of disasters have increased. The area has increased. For example, initially, in a state, 4 districts would have affected by the droughts. Now we find 15 districts, 20 districts are affected by droughts. Forest fires would have affected a small patch of the region. Now entire forest is affected by the forest fires. So it means that the area of operation has been increased. Floods, small area was there, but now we find entire stretch is affected by that. So the area has increased. Area has increased. That is one point. Second, intensity has also increased. Intensity means severity. Now they have become very, very severe. Initially, the heat waves were not that scorching. The heat waves would have not created heat strokes. Now we find that heat waves are making huge impact on the regions. So instead of 10, 15, 20, 30 deaths are there. Cloud burstings, they are also increased in the intensities. So it means they have become very severe. Cold waves have become extreme cold, maybe because of climate change or maybe because of the patterns of the changing conditions. So they are becoming very severe, which is affecting drastically on all the resources. So area has increased, severity has also increased, plus their frequencies have also increased. Frequency means the number of occurrences. The number of occurrences. Number of occurrences have also increased. So generally, if you take the data of 40 years back, in 10 years, the area would have affected by the drought maybe once or twice. But now we find every year the area is affected by drought. Cyclones and landfalls in the areas. Maybe in 10 years, 1 or 2 cyclones might have there. But now we find the number of cyclones making the landfalls have increased. So their frequencies have also increased. And the damages caused by them will also increase. Why? Because as they have become severe, the damages will also increases. The damages will also increases. So please remember the statement. The magnitude, intensity, frequency, and damages caused by the natural disasters have increased. Apart from that, something which is good is that there is a growing concern among the people to minimize the impact. Growing concern among the people to minimize the impact. Now, it means that people are becoming aware of the issues. People are becoming aware about the issues, and by that awareness, they are finding new methods, new technology to reduce the impact. And that is where we have seen many such incidences. Now take an example. If you have known about the Taiwan earthquake, this Taiwan earthquake in the year 1999, where magnitude of 7.7 struck in the year 1999. And in the year 1999, the deaths were more than 2,000. More than 2,000 deaths were there. But if you see the present scenarios, that is April, the first week of April 2024, April 3rd, more specifically, 2024. The same Taiwan was struck with an earthquake of magnitude 7.4. 7.4. Now here, if you see the deaths during the earthquake, in some references they say 9, some reference they say around 15. So the deaths were not more than 20. In some books they say 9, in some magazines they 15. So it is not more than 20. Not more than 20, right? So this is something which has made a huge change in that. Now, when we talk about the recent one, they have shown that according to the report which is given by the Taiwan Disaster Management Authority, they say it is 7.4. In United States Geological Survey, they say 7.4. In some news magazines, they say 7.2. So they say it is a 7.4 magnitude earthquake, and the distance between the epicenter and focus is 38 kilometers. 38 kilometers. That is shallow earthquake. We'll discuss what is shallow earthquake, right? So it means that the awareness has made the people to reduce the impact of the event here. Why? Because of the policies which have been created by the government in the context of reducing the impact here. So awareness is also there, and that's why you have to be updating with your current affairs. So what technologies the Taiwan has introduced so that the impact of earthquake has drastically less than what they have experienced in 25 years. So that technology has to be noted in the context of your preparation, right? We'll discuss that, but understand the flow. Then the significant change in the patterns. It means sometimes we say land use patterns have changed. Land use patterns have changed. Now, initially, when we talk about the land use patterns, the land use patterns, in the sense, there were certain areas which were referred as mountains. So in the context of mountains, we have started doing agricultural activities. Mountains are converted into agriculture. Now, as the agriculture activity has started there, so that is creating landslides, which is creating landslides. That is one example. Second example of that is, if you take the settlements in the sensitive areas, they are also increased. Now, take an example of Joshimat in the year 2023, where we find land subsidence took place in Joshimat. Land subsidence was there. Now, many reasons are given for that. One is that the pattern of land use has changed there, and also the pattern of settlements have been changed there. So we find the region has more population settlements. More people are settling there. Population settlements have increased. Then construction activities have been also increased. And these population activities, construction activities, combinedly triggered with unsustainable tourism activities. Unsustainable tourism activities. Like allowing many people at one stretch. So all these are responsible for the Joshimat landslide. Joshimat land subsidence in the year 2023. Right. So this is what you should remember in the context of the significant change in the pattern. So if you are having the holistic approach, then you can write very good answers here. Right. I'm just giving an introduction. So how awareness has created, we will see that later, but understand a flow. Understand a flow. So we find the things which were there in 1980s are not same in the 2024. They have changed. So you should be knowing why they have changed. You should be knowing how they have changed. You should be knowing how the impacts are there in the context of changing perspectives. Now, next, we move on to a definition called as hazard. Now, how do you define the term hazard? In a very simple term, hazard means it is a potential or possible threat or dangerous event or condition. I'm repeating, it is a potential threat or possible dangerous event or a condition which can make huge losses, which can have an impact on creating losses, which can create loss. And these losses are to the humans, that is individual, or it can be to the group or society, or to the country, or to the environment. We refer that as a hazard. Now, when we talk about a hazard, this hazard can be a single event. Hazard, it can be a single event. It means only one event occurring. Example, we can take drought. Only one event, drought, which is seen. Or sometimes this hazard can be one followed by other. We refer that as sequential. This hazard can be sequential. It means one event followed by another, that is primary event, secondary event, etc. Now, example of this is, the first event is earthquake. After the earthquake, in that area, that earthquake will trigger landslide. Landslide. Right. Now, this landslide which has been happened in that areas, maybe due to landslides, if it is in the mountain areas where the settlements are there, so the electric wires will be there. So maybe it can make the collapsing of the electric poles, which can create short circuit, and that short circuit can create fire, which can create a fire, forest fire, etc. So one event is triggering the second event, the third event. So we refer them as sequential hazards. Earthquake followed by landslide followed by forest fire. We refer that as sequential. And thus we have already seen many incidences. Now again, very classical example which is seen in the context of Sikkim in the year 2023. The first event which took place in the Sikkim is cloud bursting. And this cloud bursting was on a lake which was a glacial lake, which is Lonak Lake. This cloud bursting on Lonak Lake. Now, extra water entered into Lonak Lake. So this Lonak Lake was unable to hold that extra water. So it breached that water. So Lonak Lake is a glacial lake. It is a glacial lake in the high altitudes of Sikkim. Now, when there is huge rainfall here, so this Lonak Lake was unable to hold that water, and this created a secondary event called as the glacial lake outburst floods, which created the glacial lake outburst flood. Is that clear? So hence the event of 2023 which took place in Sikkim is sequential events where cloud bursting created GLOF and GLOF created flash floods, which created flash floods. Right. So always remember this flow. So it is a potential threat or condition to individual, society, country. It can be a single event or it can be multiple events which are seen here. So Bhimrai, don't worry, cloud bursting, I'll explain that. When heavy rainfall takes place in a very short period of a time. So cloud bursting itself is a hazard. So we'll discuss that in detail. So when I take individual hazards, we will discuss that. So cloud bursting is a condition where heavy rainfall takes place in a very smaller area. It is something like this. You are having a balloon, you fill the balloon with lot amount of water, and if there is a small hole, the water will move very slowly. If the balloon is burst, then what will happen? The entire water will fall on the ground in a seconds, and we refer that as the balloon has bursted and the water has spilled in the ground, which can create a havoc. The same thing is cloud bursting also. When the cloud is unable to keep the entire accumulated water which has been done due to condensation, so that large water falls in a very short period of a time, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we refer that as cloud bursting in a very simple layman's terminology. Right. Now this is the definition. Potential threat. And this is hazard to the people, threat to the people. It is in the form of deaths, injuries, disease, etc. And sometimes mental stress. Now, if any person has seen the cloud bursting, then it will have a psychological impact. So we refer that as mental stress, psychological impact. Right. Disease like COVID, which you have already experienced. Disease like plague. Right. So such events, we refer them as a hazard. Or it can be to the property, economic losses, etc. Industrial areas, agricultural areas. Sometimes when we say cyclones or floods, which will destroy that areas, right? So it is about loss of flora and fauna, loss of flora, fauna, etc. Right? So we refer that as a hazard. We refer that as a hazard. Now these hazards, they are always characterized by its location, where it has taken place, in the rural area or urban area, in the desert area or in the settlement. So we refer that as a location. So where the losses will be more, if the settlement is densely, if the economic activities are more, then the losses will be more here. Right. It also depends on the severity of that, whether it is normal one or whether it is extremely severe one. So it depends on all these parameters. And also the probability. Probability means chance of occurring. Frequency means already which has occurred here. So in 2025, what is possibility of occurring heat waves in that area? What is possibility of occurring cyclone landfall in that areas? Right. So it also depends on these possibility of occurring that again and again in that areas. Right. So you should be very careful in understanding the definition of hazard and its scope. Now, if you remember this data, that is more than sufficient. This flow plus this statement. Right. Now, classification of hazards. Now, all the hazards, the integrated research on disaster risk has classified all the hazards into 6 families. Now, these are classified as geophysical hazard. Geophysical hazard is also referred as geological hazard. Geological hazard, which is occurring due to solid nature of the earth, that is the crustal part, which is occurring due to solid nature of the earth. Solid nature of earth. That is crustal phenomena like earthquakes. Crustal phenomena like earthquakes. Right. Then hydrological hazard. Hydrological hazard means it is due to impact of water. So hence hydrological hazard is due to presence, distribution, and this water is not always stagnant. It moves. Presence, distribution, and movement of water. Where? On the surface and subsurface. Surface means above the earth. Subsurface means groundwater. On the surface and subsurface. We refer that as hydrological hazard. Right. So it is a surface phenomenon, and it is also referred as subsurface phenomenon. Subsurface means which is in the ground. Now, meteorological hazard. Meteorological hazards, the moment when you read them, you should remember that they are due to extreme weather condition and atmospheric phenomena. They are due to extreme weather condition, or atmospheric phenomenon like cyclones, twisters, tornadoes, etc. or atmospheric phenomenon. And these operate from hours to weeks. They occur from hours. Generally, we say minutes, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 50 minutes, or sometimes they can extend up to a week. It means they are very short duration. They are short duration. And their area of operation is also not very huge. They can be very small to bit more. We refer them as micro to meso. So the area of operation is micro to meso scale. So remember, their scale of operation is, they can be very small event which can affect a taluka place or sometimes a district place, but not the entire state. So their scale of operation is comparatively smaller. Comparatively small. We refer that as meteorological hazard. Then something called as climatological hazard. So this climatological hazard is for a very long period of a time. It is for a very long period of a time. Sometimes it starts from within the season. We refer that as intra-season. It can be within the season, called as intra-season. And sometimes it is up to a decade. Sometimes it is up to decade. That is 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, etc. So we refer them as climatological hazard. The moment when you say climatology, climate means long-term data. Climate means long-term data. 15 years, 20 years. So there is a difference between weather and climate. So climate means long-term data when it is seen. So here also it is a long-term. It can be intra-seasonal, within the season up to decades. We refer that as climatological hazards. And as they are longer, so their scale of operation is also very huge. So their scale of operation is very huge. So they are from meso, medium to very large. They are meso, that is medium, to macro, that is very large. Entire state can be affected. Entire peninsula can be affected. We refer that as climatological hazard. Right. Then biological hazard. So biological hazard means it is due to exposure to the living organism. It is due to exposure to living organism. Like we come across many living organisms which are having pathogens which are carried away, like COVID, bird flu, etc. Exposure to living organisms. Second, or exposure to the toxic substances. Exposure to toxic substances, which can make the event to spread. Or sometimes it is vector-borne disease like malaria, dengue, etc. Vector-borne. Right. So we have very classical example of this. 2020 we experienced COVID, which is referred as a pandemic. Right. Then plague. Right. Bird flus. So we refer them as biological hazards. Then extraterrestrial hazards. So extraterrestrial hazards are those which are due to the events like impact of meteorites, or something which is outside the Earth's space. So we refer that as extraterrestrial hazards. So we have classified this. Yasin, COVID is referred as a disaster. So we have classified COVID as a disaster. So that is, we will discuss in the later stage. COVID is a disaster which created huge losses. Right. Next, examples. If you take an example of that, the geophysical hazards, mass movement, land subsidence like Joshimat, earthquake, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. Right. Then this is hydrological droughts, floods, landslides. Meteorological, like severe storm and extreme temperature. I told that when we talk about meteorological hazards, so meteorological hazards means they are the hazards which may be for minutes, maybe for weeks, maybe due to extreme conditions like a cyclone, or maybe due to heat waves which may be there for 1 day, 2 days, etc. Right? And we refer them as meteorological. Now, sometimes we come across an events where cumulative effort, droughts were there, absence of rainfall, which triggers them maybe for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years data. After that, they can come under the impact of the event. We refer them as climatological part. So it is intra-seasonal, that is within the season. Sometimes it can extend up to maybe for 5 years, 2 years, or sometimes 10 years also. We refer that as climatological data. Long term, and the area of operation is also very high. Then biological, algal blooms, epidemics like what we refer them as COVID, and insect infestation. So these are referred as the biological hazards. Right. Then space weathers, near Earth objects like meteorite colliding with the Earth, or any object colliding with the Earth, which can trigger the huge losses. We refer them as extraterrestrial type of events. Right. Insect infestation means the vectors which are spreading due to the insects. Now, whatever I have explained there in a very simple term, what is earthquake, their primary and secondary disasters. Please read them. Don't make research. This is more than sufficient. This is more than sufficient. So what happens when the earthquake takes place? Please read them carefully. Then what happens when the volcano takes place? Remember, in the context of India, at present, we don't have volcanic activities. Only two areas were there where the volcanoes were there. And in fact, only one area is there in India which is referred as volcanically active region, which is referred as Barren Island. Barren Island in Andaman and Nicobar. Right, active volcano. So this is only active volcano in context of India, that is more specifically in the Andaman and Nicobar. So we don't find volcanic activities dominant in India. Only in the year 2018, some amount of volcanic activity took place in Barren Island. It is the only active volcano in India. We find dominance of earthquakes are very strong, and this is mainly due to the geographical aspect of the collision of continent and continental plates. Next, tsunamis. India, we find tsunamis are very dominant in the coastal areas, right? So we have to read in detail about tsunamis. We'll read about earthquake. We will discuss about tsunamis in detail. Then floods, landslides. So we will discuss floods and landslides in detail. India is affected by flood and India is affected by landslide. I'll discuss them in detail. So what are floods and what are landslides? We will discuss them, impacts and other parameters. But before that, read them. After the class, read them. There are certain things which are very significant, and the basics of geography will help you to link them. Right. whatever content is there, spend some time, 15-20 minutes, and read them. They are more than sufficient. They are more than sufficient to link your topics: meteorological, climatological, biological. So this is what the things. So always have the patience. The first thing about UPSC is you should have patience to read. You should have patience to understand that. And if you understand the things with patiently, the entire concept will become clear cut. So please have the patience in listening the content, understand them, make your own notes. So that is the only way where you can crack UPSC. Right. Subsistence, it's a very simple definition. In geography I've studied. When the land collapses, we refer that as subsistence. Then the types of natural hazards. Natural hazards. See, Yasin, these definitions are very basics in geography. It is something like this. If you are having a table, I'm giving an example. If you are having a table, and from the table, if a pen is falling, if a notebook is falling, like if a mountain is there, if a rock is falling, we refer that as landslide. Landslide. Now, if the table itself falls down, if the part of a mountain itself moves down, we refer that as subsistence. We refer that as subsistence. So natural hazards can be hydrological, atmospheric, geological, or biological. This is what we have explained now. This is how we define the hazards. So hazards can be natural. We don't have control on them. We don't have control on them. Then they can be man-made disasters. Sorry, man-made hazards. They can be industrial. They can be due to chemical, biological, etc. Like Hiroshima atomic bomb. Hiroshima atomic bomb. Or sometimes due to the accidents which takes place in the nuclear power plants. Right. So they can be industrial or they can be technical one. Now these man-made hazards, they are due to error or they are with some purpose. Purpose means deliberate. So when a person is throwing atomic bomb, he knows the consequences of that. So purpose means deliberate. Now take an example of the Ukraine and Russia war. So the Ukraine and Russia war is not called as an error. It is deliberate. Deliberate. They know the consequences, but in spite of that, they are throwing the bombs. They are attacking each other. So that is called as purposeful. Purposeful. Accidents are errors. Right. So please understand this. Man-made hazards, they can be errors, maybe due to accident or maybe due to technical glitch. But some of them are with purposeful. Throwing a bomb in some other area is a purpose. There is a purpose behind that. Right. So man-made events are errors or purposeful. So please keep this in the mind. Now here when we say error, it can be human error or it can be technical error. Technical error, technology collapsing, etc. Right. So generally we refer them as accidents. Accident, nuclear accidents, train collision, that is also due to negligence. If you put a proper instrument, then it can be avoided. Landslides, sorry, when we say stampede in the temple areas, stampede, maybe due to human error where the proper arrangements are not done. So the pilgrimage areas where the devotees are there, suddenly they start running due to some type of misunderstanding concepts. So in that also we find deaths are there. So stampedes, train collisions, nuclear accidents, they are referred as errors. But throwing an atomic bomb is not an error. It is deliberate. It is deliberate. So here it can be stampede, train accident, etc., which are due to the errors, right? So we refer them as the error perspectives. Yes, boiler explosion means due to the impact of some technical aspect, the heating aspect in that is not sufficient. It is just like your cooker explosion. So when it explodes, it will create burns and deaths there, right? Now, socio-natural hazard. The moment when you talk about socio-natural hazards, understand this. Now, this is an area. I'm giving an example. Now, in this area, it is a mountain region. It is a mountain region. Now, because of its slopes, as it is having steep slopes, so this mountain is vulnerable for natural hazard called as landslide. So naturally this area will have landslide. That means the part of that falls downward. That is natural disaster. Natural hazard is that is landslides. But due to the human activities, certain human activities, when we say like overgrazing on the slopes of mountains, or due to construction activities like hydroelectricity projects, etc., or due to deforestation. So because of these, the soil holding capacity of the mountain decreases, and this event will trigger increasing in the incidence and intensity of landslides. So these events will increase the severity, intensity of natural disasters. So they increase the natural disaster. In the context of occurrence, in the context of their frequency, etc. So such types of disasters, we refer that as socio-natural disaster. It means human activities which triggers the natural disasters. Circumstances where the human activities increases in the occurrence of certain hazards beyond their natural probabilities. We refer them as the socio-natural hazards. Now here, the moment when we say socio-natural hazards, as the human involvement is seen here, so they can be avoided or reduced. So these socio-natural hazards, they can be avoided or their impact can be reduced. But how you can reduce their impact? How you can avoid them? It is mainly through wise management. Wise management of land and environment. It is through wise management of land and environment resources. Now, what is this wise management we are talking? So, wise management means instead of deforestation, you can make afforestation. Instead of overgrazing, restrict the grazing activities. Then instead of construction activities, regulate only those which will not harm, permit them. So regulation of activities. So by doing this, we can reduce the impact here. Apart from that, If any area is affected by the drought, then we can make rainwater harvesting or water storages can be done. So restoring the lakes, ponds, etc. So when you restore the lakes, restore the ponds, so they will help during the drought conditions. So that's why, if you see the example, present example of Bangalore 2024, we have not restored any lakes, we have not restored any ponds, we have not restored any rivers which can provide water. So when we are not restored them, then where groundwater will be? So all the bore wells have become dry, all the sources of water have become dry due to over evaporation, and that is supported by the impact of climate change. So hence wise management is very, very important. If you manage them, if you recharge the groundwater, if you restore the wetlands, then there is a possibility that that can provide sufficient amount of water for survival. So hence these social natural hazards like the droughts, like the landslides, they can be avoided by wise management of the natural resources, wise management of land, wise management of environment. If we have restored properly the lakes, if we have maintained the rivers in a proper condition, then we would have not had the major problem what we are facing in the Bangalore or many states here. So we refer that as the social natural hazard. So you should be very careful of that. Example, it can be drought, it can be landslide, etc. So social natural hazards. So remember, social natural hazards, they may ask question next year itself, because now the incidences of social natural hazards are increasing and they are becoming more dangerous. Take example of the drought conditions in the state of Karnataka, drought conditions in the state of Maharashtra, right? So we refer them as the socio natural hazards. Please revise them carefully. Focus on discussion, understand the terminologies, concentrate on the discussion. So once you concentrate, once you understand that complete, then it becomes very easy. Now next is vulnerability. Now this is very important aspect of any hazard. Now the moment when we say vulnerability, what does vulnerability means? It is inability. Vulnerability means it is inability to deal with the condition, inability to deal or cope up with condition or event, inability to deal with the condition, cope up with the event effectively. You're not effective in handling the condition, inability to deal or cope up with the condition or an event effectively by individual or community or a group or a country, or we can say the environment. Right. So here, inability to deal or cope up with the condition event effectively by individual, community, group, or country, or the environment. We refer that as a vulnerability. We refer this as vulnerability. Or we can say that it is a degree of resistance to the impact of hazard. Or we say it is a degree of resistance to impact of hazard. Now, this degree of resistance to the impact of hazard is also by individual, community, or group. So it is inability to handle the condition. It is inability to handle the condition effectively. We refer that as vulnerability. Right. Now, this vulnerability, it is defined by many conditions. It is defined by many conditions. By many conditions. Now, what conditions you are talking about? It can be due to, say, physical condition. Physical condition. Now, how this physical condition is defined? Now, take the example. If you are constructing a house in any area, now if you are constructing the house there, if you find that area or that region is earthquake hazard zone, which is vulnerable for earthquake, then you should not construct the house here. If you are constructing the house, if that area is vulnerable for earthquake, then you should not construct the house there. If at all you are constructing there, you should construct the house which has the standard which can resist that. So we refer that as physical aspect. Now, second aspect is something which is referred as economic vulnerability. Now, in the context of India, we are having rich and poor. Now, in the incidences of any such events, take an example of COVID. Who are affected most? It is the poor. Why? Because they do not have much resources with them. They do not have large amount of the medical facilities to them, right? So poor are most affected. It also depends on society. It also depends on the social condition or society. Like, if any society is orthodoxy, traditional based, they will not accept the changes which were there. Now, this is example of COVID only. Now, in the initial stage, there were many communities which resisted to the vaccination. They did not accept the vaccination in the initial stage. So in those communities, the incidences of COVID were very high. But those communities which accepted the vaccination, which maintained the social distances, so in those communities, we find the events of the COVID were comparatively less. So we refer that as social conditions. It means awareness and acceptance. They accepted that the COVID is a fatal and they need to go with vaccination. They accepted social distances. They accepted using of the masks. So hence we find they were comparatively less. It also depends on political condition. Now, what type of political conditions? It means that the government which make policies which can be effective in implementing budgetary allocation. If they allocate sufficient amount, then only they can handle the condition carefully, or else it is not possible. So hence these are referred as vulnerabilities. Now, higher the vulnerability, there is more threat for the events to take place. Higher the vulnerability, higher is the threat. Higher vulnerability, it means higher threat. Poor people are more vulnerable, so they are having more threat. Orthodoxy societies, they are having major threat, right? So this is what you should remember about the vulnerability aspect. Now, the moment when we say vulnerability, it varies significantly within communities. Vulnerability, it varies significantly within communities. Now, example of this is, if you take the communities like poor and rich. Now, who are most affected? The poor communities are affected most. If you take the old people and the young people, so old childrens are most affected, orthodox community and the accepted communities. So hence it always varies within the community. Some communities are most affected, some communities are less affected. This is one plus. Apart from that, apart from this vulnerability will never remains the same. It changes along with the time. It changes with time. Now again, the example is COVID only. So in the beginning of the COVID, 2019 and 20, the vulnerability was very high. Deaths were very high. Casualties were very high in the beginning of 2020. But as we reached to the end of 2020, 21, we created vaccination, we created awareness, we created many types of treatments. By that, the vulnerability decreased over a period of a time. So this COVID vulnerability was very high in the year 2019 and 20. But the same COVID vulnerability decreased. It decreased in the year 2022. Why? Because of many methods which were done. Ventilation was done. We created proper vaccination. We created medical facilities to them. Lockdown was imposed. So by that, the COVID incidences were reduced. So hence, this vulnerability, it varies significantly from community to community. And this vulnerability, it always changes from time to time. Changes from time to time. It always changes. Take an example of any such events. 1999, Taiwan was most vulnerable due to impact of earthquake. But now the vulnerability of the Taiwan has decreased. Why? They have created earthquake resistant buildings. They are constructing earthquake resistant buildings where the government has provided them subsidies. Now the deaths are reduced. So this is what we say, the vulnerability profile has been changing over a period of a time. Right. So this is something which you should remember. So COVID is a biological and it is man-made, we can say. So rather than man-made, the most appropriate is biological. Yes, it is human error, we can say. Human error. Man-made means due to deforestation, due to some glitches which were not accustomed, right? So within biological, human error is strongly seen here. So we can't say 100%. So many reports have said that COVID is a biological disaster with human involvement. Vulnerability and intensity are the same. So don't, that's what I told you in the beginning, that the terms will be same, but there is a very thin line of demarcation between them. So vulnerability is a concept. Intensity talks about severity. So vulnerability may be high or vulnerability may be low. So vulnerability, if it is very high, then they become more intensive. If it is less, then it is less. So vulnerability defines the intensity. Vulnerability defines the intensity. If high vulnerable, then higher intensity. If lower vulnerable, then lower intensity. So hence, you should always remember the vulnerability part, right? So in a very simple definition, it is the degree of resistance, or it is a resistance which is given by a person or by any type of the activities where they can cope up with the condition, right? The key causes are social, political, and these. Now, in a very simple definition, the conditions determined by physical, social, economic factors, which increases the susceptibility. Susceptibility means possibility. Susceptibility means possibility. Possibility. So hence, one of the important aspect of disaster management is to decrease vulnerability. One of the important component is to decrease the vulnerability. If we decrease the vulnerability, then the impact will be very, very less here. Is that clear? Now, this is a definition which is given in your NCRT. The extent to which community disrupted as a particular hazard, which can be defined as socio-economic condition or physical condition. Any definition which is feasible, you can take. Any definition or anything which is where you feel feasible, you can put them. This is from NCRT, and this is a broader perspective. If they ask for 15 marks, then you should define this. If it is for 15 marks, understand them with the flow. Don't make much stressful. Read them carefully, understand them. I have tried to explain them in a very simplest possible way. Right. Now, the next very important term is capacity. Now, the moment when we say capacity, capacity means it is strength or resistance. Capacity means it is a strength or resistance. Or it is also defined as resources. Strength or resistance or resources. Resources means finance, medicine, availability of water, leadership, etc. So strength or resistance or the resources. So remember the two terms, strength or resistance or the resources, which exists within individual, within community, within a country, or within the environment, that is the physical space. Etc. Right. It is a strength, resistance, or resources which exist within the individual, community, or environment, so that they can handle or cope up the condition. Right. So that they can cope up the condition. Cope up means handle the condition, or they can prepare to handle the condition, or they can resist to the impact. If they are not able to resist, they should recover quickly. Recover quickly from the impact of hazard. From impact of hazard. So we refer that as capacity. So it exists within the individual, community, or environment to handle. If they are unable to handle, recover very quickly, recover very fast from that incidences. So we refer that as capacity. Now, if the capacity is more, increased capacity will always reduces the vulnerability. Increased capacity. So here, increased capacity means you are talking about increasing the capacity of individual, community, environment, or a country. Increased capacity of all these: individual, community, country, etc. So if you increase their capacity, it reduces the vulnerability. It reduces vulnerability. vulnerability to the impact of hazard. Impact of hazard. So the major idea of disaster management is to increase the capacity of individual, of a country, of a community, of an environment. Now, how this is increased? How this is increased? It can be increased by a proper leadership quality. A good leader will manage the resources, proper financial resources, that is budgetary allocation, providing them technology like earthquake resistant buildings, etc., providing them technology. Then awareness among the community. Then afforestation, plant more amount of trees. Afforestation, right? It also talks about creating a proper infrastructure, like in the context of India, we are having something called as Bureau of Indian Standards, which mention different standards to be maintained. So proper infrastructures, proper infrastructures, etc. Plus, it is also something which is associated with skill and innovation. Skill and innovation. Innovation. So whenever when you are writing anything on the capacity, you should remember that capacity means it is increasing the strength of an individual. Now take an example. During COVID, a weak person and strong person, where do you find the resistance was more? Who was vulnerable in the context of COVID? A weak person or the person who is having more resistance? So the weak person was always affected by the COVID, always by the COVID. So hence, when we talk about these, you should always remember that in the context of COVID, the person with less resistance already is having a disease, already is having, so he is the one who is having more threat of impacting of the COVID. Why? Because his resistance is very less. If you take old age people, their resistance are less, so the impact of heat waves will be more on the old age people. If the area is not having any type of vegetation, then during the impact of COVID, oxygen deficiency was seen. Why? Because we did not have sufficient oxygen, which was created by the photosynthetic material. Right? Food resources were not there. Why? Because we did not have proper vegetation. So hence, all these are important in the context of capacity. So it is resources, means, and strengths which exist in individual, community, country, or in fact environment to handle the conditions. We refer that as capacity. So always remember, we have to increase the capacity of that. Now that's what we are focusing, right? We are focusing on early warning system like creating NISAR. We are focusing on earthquake resistant buildings. We are focusing on many innovation. We are focusing on many type of the seeds like genetically modified seeds in the drought resistant areas. So we are making all type of innovations. We are creating a strong leadership who can focus on creating the idea like restoring of the lakes. A leader who can take a lead and make community to participate in the government programs. Budget, if the budget is not there, then how you can take up a program, right? Technology, without technology it is not possible. Restoring a lake is not possible in the cost effective part, right? So all these are referred as the methods or way to increase the capacity. Now this is all about a story. If you understand a concept, then you can write very good answers in UPSC. Now you don't have to by heart also. You don't have to by heart them also. Only thing is you have to understand them in the proper perspective. So that's what I told you. If you maintain the flow charts, then it becomes very easy for you to write any type of questions which are asked in the UPSC. So never make a mistake in by hearting. Don't by heart any terminologies. Never do by hearting. So always read them carefully one time, two time, then understand the concept behind that. So once you are understood that, then I don't think you will have any type of the parameters. Now we come across something called as disaster risk. Now understand one aspect. Now the moment when you talk about disaster risk, yes, flowcharts are very important. Flowcharts are important. Flowcharts will help you to score more things. They will help you to score more things. Now, in context of any disaster, we always come across the two terms called as risk and crisis. We always come across this risk and crisis. Now, understand the difference between that. Now, this is very simple, right? Now, if a person A, he wants to invest in mutual funds, right? Uh, if a person A wants to invest in the mutual fund, so will he directly invest in the mutual fund, or he will check what are the major issues associated with the mutual fund? He read all the documents. So it means he will analyze the risk involved in the mutual fund. So before investment, he will read about the risk. So risk is before investing. Before investing, these are the risks involved there. These are the issues involved there. After reading the risk, he will invest. So this mutual fund is an event where he has invested. And after investment, two possibilities are there. He may become bankrupt, or he may become super rich person. So if he is super rich, there is no problem. But once he has become bankrupt, it means that he is undergoing crisis. So after the event, it is crisis. After the event, we refer that as crisis. Right. So always remember, in the context of disasters also, if you are reading about any events, like the flood, earthquake, etc., all the things which are calculated before, we refer that as risk. Calculating before the event, we refer that as risk. After the event, when the losses are there, deaths are there, you manage that, we refer that as crisis. So hence, in the context of disaster management, you should remember that pre-disaster management always talks about risk management. Pre-disaster management, that is before the event, we refer them as risk management. You try to reduce the risk. You analyze them carefully. You take a data of back 20 years, 30 years. Then see how you can reduce the risk there. And after that, when the event has occurred, when we are unable to control that, then that will lead to injuries, that will lead to death, that will lead to loss of properties. We refer that as crisis. So that's why whenever after the salary, when you spend all 15, 20,000 or 50,000 in the first week, then you will say that I have financial crisis. Why? Because of mismanagement. Water crisis, because of mismanagement, right? So crisis is always referred as post-disaster management. Is that clear? So you should be very careful in understanding the term risk. It is in the beginning, and after the event, whatever you do, we refer that as crisis. So please understand the difference between risk and crisis. Now, your priority is to first reduce the risk. If not, then you have to reduce the crisis. So this is what you have to remember. Is it clear? So risk is taken into priority now. You curb that in the beginning itself. So we refer that as a risk. Now, how to define this risk parameter? how to define this risk parameter in a very simple term. In a very simple term, the moment when you talk about the risk, it measures of expected losses. So the moment when we say risk, it is the measure of expected losses in terms of death, injury, property loss, etc. Right? It is risk means measure of expected losses like deaths, injuries, property, to the impact of hazard. To the impact of hazard. Right. If you mention impact of disaster, then disaster means already you agreed that the loss has immense. So you should be very careful in your terms. So it is impact of hazard, not impact of disaster. Impact of that. Right. Now next, the principle of disaster management. Whenever when we talk about the principle of disaster management, principle means its theme. Principle of disaster management is to identify that risk which is there in that event, identify that, or recognize or identify the risk involved and try to minimize or mitigate that risk. Then try to minimize or mitigate that risk. This is what the principle of disaster management is. Now, what is risk management? What is risk management? Generally, we say disaster risk management. Disaster risk management. Disaster risk management means anything which is beginning. Anything which is beginning. So in the context of disaster risk management, you should have a complete idea about that event. So it consists of assessment and analysis. It consists of assessment and analysis. It consists of assessment and analysis of the hazard or event. Now, this is based on previous occurrence. It is based on the studies there. You have to make an assessment. You have to make an analysis of that hazard which is to be occurred there. And once you have made an assessment, once you have made the analysis of that, then you have to implement. After that, implementation. So what you have to implement? You have to implement strategies and specific action. Strategies and specific action. Specific action. And these strategies and specific action will be such that they can control or they can reduce or they can transfer the risk. Transfer the risk. So this is what you should remember in the context of disaster risk. Right. So it is before any event. Before any event. So risk measures expected losses in terms of deaths, injuries, and property to the impact of hazard. And the principle of disaster management is to recognize or identify the risk which is involved. And once you identify, you will try to minimize or mitigate that hazard. Then, risk management talks about assessment, analysis of the event, and then implement the strategies. What strategies you are having with the experience, what strategies you are having with your available resources, what type of action you can take based on your capacities. So by combined effect of all these, you can control the event, or you can reduce the impact of that event, or you can transfer the risk to some other, like insurance activities, etc. So we refer that as risk perspectives, right? So this is what you should remember. So disaster risk is expressed in likelihood, possibility of losses are there, right, in the context of disaster management. So please remember these terminologies: hazard, disaster, vulnerability, capacities, disaster, risk. All these terms are very, very important. All these terms are very important, right? Now we can have a break of 15 minutes, then we will start from where we have left. So we'll start the class at 8:05. 8:05. See, principle of disaster management is understand the risk. What type of risk is there involved in that event? If you are studying about, say, landslide, risk involved is what will happen if the land collapses, what will happen to the people who are staying there, what will happen to the forest in that areas, what will happen to the agricultural fields which are there, what will happen to the local people as well as animals who are staying there. So this is about recognizing the risk associated with the landslide. Now once you have understood that, then what you will do, you will make the people to leave their homes and come outside. You will make arrangement of the region with the financial possibilities. So we refer that as mitigate or minimize the impact by knowing the possible risk associated in that. We refer that as recognizing and identifying the risk and putting them right. So you can have a break, then we'll meet up at 8:05. Don't get much stress. So the PPTs will help you to understand. Read the PPTs, read the content without missing any word, and update that with your current affairs. Don't get much stress. Don't depend on huge content. Read the PPTs, understand the terminologies, revise them often and often, and access to National Disaster Management Authority NDMA website, and update that with your current affairs. So that's why I have spent more than 1 hour in explaining the scope of this subject, right? So welcome back after a break. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all, right? So we discussed about the risk associated with the hazards. Right. Now, this data will help you in the context of writing a proper introduction in the mains. The impact of climate change on disaster. Now, here when we talk about the climate change, so weather-based events have increased in their incidences. Now, take an example of cyclones. Right? It can be tropical cyclones. So, under 2.5 degree increase in the global warming, then the cyclones are the one which can make more havocs, more specifically tropical cyclones, which will increase in their intensities and occurrences also. So we'll discuss this aspect in detail. Right. I have told them to share the PPT links. I have told them to share with the PPT links there. Then next, it is something which is associated with the drought. Right. So this is also something which is linked with the impact of climate change. So the number of people suffering from drought across the world will double in 8 years. So the people will be affected more. Now this is mainly because of two things. One is increasing in the population. Population is also increasing. And second one is the impact of climate change where the rainfall patterns have affected. Impact of rainfall. Impact of the rivers which are becoming dry due to less amount of rainfall. So it is due to population increase and the climate change parameters. So as the population increases, over exploitation of resources will be there, and the climate change has also changed the rainfall patterns which is affecting. Then it also highlighted about the floods. So the floods will also increase in their severity. They will also increase in the severity. Now always remember that. Always remember that there is a direct relationship between the rainfall and the floods. Now, the report which has given the IPCC, which has given a report, it says that for every 1 degree rise in the temperature, for every 1 degree rise in the temperature of the ocean surfaces or the Earth's atmosphere. Now, this is very simple. If you take a dry cotton cloth and already wet cotton cloth, if you dip them in the water, which cotton cloth will absorb more water? Dry cotton cloth or wet cotton cloth? Which will absorb more water if you dip both in the water? Both are cotton cloth. One is dry and one is already wet cotton cloth. If you dip them in the bucket where it is having water, right? So which one will absorb more water? Which cotton cloth will absorb more water? Now, if you understand that, then your content will become very clear. So the dry cotton cloth will absorb more water. Now, in the same way, for every 1 degree increase in the temperature of the air, of the atmosphere, then what will happen to the moisture holding capacity of the air? Will it increase? Moisture means water vapor, which is arise due to evaporation. For every 1 degree, perfect. So for every 1 degree increase in the temperature, the moisture holding capacity of air increases to 7%. So this will increase the moisture holding capacity of an air. For 1 degree centigrade, 7% of more moisture it will hold. 7% more moisture it holds. Now, if there is 2 degrees, then 14% of moisture. So please understand this part. This is direct impact of the increasing temperature. So more the temperature, the dry air, when it is moving on the surface of ocean, it will absorb more moisture. And when it enters into the coastal areas, will it increase the rainfall or it will decrease the rainfall? So if any dry wind, this is an area. Now here we find the water bodies. Water bodies. Now on this we find the wind is traveling where the temperature of that area is high. So it will absorb more moisture. It will absorb more moisture. And this, when it enters into the coastal areas like western part of India or in Australia or in any other areas, so that will increase the incidences of the floods. That will increase the incidence of the floods. Is that clear now? So hence we say that the incidences of floods will also increase due to heavy precipitation because of this parameters. Now, this is how you are to link your studies. Certainly, you should not be in a dilemma that how the increasing temperature can create the floods. It is because of such conditions. Is that clear? Then, because of the change temperature, the heat waves already have increased. We have seen the examples of that. The disease have also increased. More infectious diseases are there. We have already experienced COVID, bird flu, many types of disease which have increased. So by 2050, vector-borne disease and all will increase very high. Then sea level rise. We already seen that the sea level is always increasing. Now the reason for sea level increasing, one is that due to increased temperature, the water will expand. Due to increase of the temperature, the water will expand. It expand. And second thing is, due to melting of glacier, more fresh water will enter here. Melting of ice, more water will enter. So hence, because of these two, we find that the water level increases in the coastal areas, right? So Stephen, don't worry, heat waves, I'll explain that. So when I take individual heat waves means suddenly the temperature of the air in the surrounding increases. We refer that as heat waves. So the temperature reaches to 35, 40, etc. We refer that as heat waves. So I will discuss that in detail because at present, India and many countries are experiencing heat waves. We will discuss that. So focus on the flow, right? Wildfire. So we find wildfires have also increased. Wildfire means forest fires due to droughts, vegetation which has become completely dry, right? So this is mainly due to drought and dry vegetation. Dry vegetation. So where we find the incidences will be very, very high. So this you can keep as a reference when you're writing introduction in the mains, or when you're writing them as the conclusion. So please remember these. If you are writing anything on heat waves, floods, droughts, cyclones, so they can boost marks in the context of your UPSC. And these all are extracted from the reports which are given by many institutes, maybe from NASA, NOAA, IPCC, or many government datas. Then, in the context of India, if you see the events, extreme weather events like cold waves, heat waves, lightning, floods, cyclones, they all have increased. Now, if you are good enough in the datas, IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in the context of its fourth assessment report, which was given in the year 2007, which said that the tropical countries are the one which will be most affected by extreme weather conditions. It says that the tropical countries are the one which will be most affected by extreme weather events. The tropical countries will be the hotbed in the context of climate change. In the context of climate change. Now, the moment when we say extreme weather conditions, so extreme weather conditions includes floods, it includes droughts, it includes cloud bursting, it includes heat waves and cold waves, right? It talks about cyclones, etc., etc. So these are referred as extreme weather conditions. Extreme weather conditions. And if you take India, most part of India where the Tropic of Cancer passes, we find it is in the tropical part. So if you take this as a Tropic of Cancer, so this entire area falls under the tropical region, which is most affected by the impact of climate change as per the IPCC's fourth assessment report. Now, please keep this in the mind. This is very important when you're writing anything on India's disaster or India's vulnerability. So this is the first thing you should keep in the mind. Then, second perspective is when you talk about the events here, the cold waves, heat waves, etc. State-wise, if you take Odisha is most affected by cyclones and the storms. And if you take the state, Tamil Nadu is affected by floods during northeast monsoon and is affected by cyclones. And if you take Telangana, which is landlocked, Telangana is affected by heat waves. So please read them carefully. Go through the map carefully, and then you will understand which state has what type of events, which talks about the state and the hazards associated. So here I have given you that states and what type of hazards are affected that. If you take Andhra Pradesh, so we find heat waves, we find cold waves and other parts. If you take Odisha, so this is how the disaster perspectives are there. So please read them carefully. Right, so glance them carefully and make separate notes on that, which state is affected by which type of disaster event. So please keep this as a ready reckoner so that you can introduce that state. If any type of event has taken place, you can give a proper introduction, keeping these things in the mind. Other states, Arunachal Pradesh, where we find floods are there due to heavy rainfall. Then maybe Brahmaputra and other rainfall, cloud bursting, etc. If you take Goa is again affected by floods and heavy rainfall, right? So these all are states and the associated weather conditions. Spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes and make a separate list based on these data. Right. Now, if you take vulnerability profile of India, vulnerability means possibility of the threats. Now, again, here you should understand one aspect. If you take India, right? India, based on 2011 census, it is second populous. Based on 2011 census, it is second in population because we don't have 2021 data. Second, India is seventh largest in area. Area wise, it is seventh largest. Right. Third, India has a long coastline of 7,516 kilometers. Long coastline, which is 7,516 kilometers. Fourth, India geologically very complex. When Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate, it created Himalayas. So complex geology. Right. So here it is Indian plate when it collided with the Eurasian plate. So one is oldest part and one is newest part. oldest and newest part. Geography wise also we find India is not uniform. That is landforms. In India we are having mountains, we have deserts, we have plain areas, we have valleys, etc. So landforms are of varied characteristics. We have mountains are there, deserts are there, plains are there, valleys are there, right? Then in India, we are having huge economic disparities. Rich and poor are existing. So, economic disparities are large. Then India, we find both type of economic activities are there, agriculture as well as industries. If we take economic activities, we have agriculture is also dominant. We have industry also dominant. So we find both type of activities are dominant in the context of India, right? Then, along with that, in the context of the structure of demography, right? Demography, the population wise. So we find it is not uniform. We have old age population and we have young age population. Old age and young population. So demography is also not uniform. We find varieties are there. So hence, when you take the consideration of all these, when you take the consideration of all these area wise, coastline wise, geology wise, geography wise, economic activity wise, etc. In India, the vulnerability is not uniform. So hence, because of all these, the vulnerability is not uniform. That is, rich, poor are existing. And also, if you take the Indian part, this also you should add. Most of the Indian geographical part is in the tropical areas. Most of India's landform is in tropical area. Tropical area. So hence, the vulnerability is not uniform. And hence, India is associated with different type of hazards. Hence, India is associated with different types of hazards. And their impacts are also not same. Some areas are most affected, some areas are less affected. Some areas are affected by cyclones, some areas are affected by droughts, some areas are affected by the floods. So different types of hazards are there, and they are also not uniformly distributed. In the same areas, poor, rich, old, haves, have not. So all they are affected. So please keep this in the mind. So this is what makes India, these characteristics, what makes India, which experience different hazards, and the vulnerability profile of India is also not uniform. Is not uniform. Now, what type of hazards are there in the context of India? Hazard and their vulnerability. So many hazards are there. Many hazards are there. Now, if you take up them, the first one is earthquake. Now, if you take the vulnerability of earthquake in India, around 59%, or more specifically, we say 58.6% of the land is vulnerable for earthquake. 59% of the total land is vulnerable for earthquake. Possibility of earthquake is there. Then second, with reference to floods. In the context of floods, of the total land. So if you take the total land of India, it is 329 million hectares. Out of this 329 million hectares, 40 million hectares, 40 million hectares, or more specifically, we say around 12%, 12% is vulnerable to the flood. Vulnerable to the flood. Then, third one is with reference to cyclones and storms. So, out of the total 7,516 kilometers, 5,700 kilometers of coastline is vulnerable. 5,700 kilometers of coastline is vulnerable in the context of cyclones and the storms. Then when you talk about the drought. Now in the context of India, if you take the net sown area, which is 140 million hectares, out of that 50% is rain-fed area. So we say 50% of net sown area is rain-fed, which is vulnerable for the drought-like condition. So what is net sown area of India? Net sown area of India is 140 million hectares. And 50% of that means 70 million hectares. 70 million hectares is vulnerable in the context of droughts. Apart from that, in the context of India, we also find that landslides are dominant. And 12% of geographical area is vulnerable for landslides. Apart from that, in India, we also find the incidences of cloud bursting. Then glacial lake outburst floods. GLOF, glacial lake outburst floods. And then we also experiences the events called as heat waves and cold waves. Heat and cold waves. So these are something which are associated with the hazards which are seen in context of India. Now please read them carefully. Make a separate list. Why India is vulnerable and which type of hazards are there which makes India most vulnerable. Now if you remember this can become your framework for any answer you are writing in UPSC with reference to the hazard. If the question is asked on cyclones, pick up this entire India's perspective and link that with the cyclones. So this will help you in giving a proper introduction. So read this slides very carefully. Read this slide very carefully. Analyze these points. Plus keep both things in the mind. And then keeping these things in the mind, we can say out of 36 states and union territories, 27 are disaster prone. And always remember, in the context of India, it is not a single hazard. Many hazards are there. Which can be sequential or which can be individual. And the vulnerability profile of India. Vulnerability is not uniform. So that is the reason where we say the disaster in the context of India is very complex. Now maps you can draw if any one disaster is asked or if any hazard is asked. You should practice a map, not the political map. You can make a reference of that. Right, so it is good if you practice the maps. If you're writing on the drought-like condition, draw that area and put or show that in the map. Not exactly, approximately you can show. So this will fetch you good marks. If you draw the map, that will fetch you good marks. Now, for example, if you're writing on the cyclone, the landfall of the tropical cyclone was somewhere in the Andhra. So you can show this area. Rather than drawing entire India, you can show this region. So the tropical cyclone landfall in Andhra Pradesh. It's less than 5 seconds. Less than 5 seconds. If you're writing on any type of landslides in the Himalayan region, so you can show the maps of Himalayas, right? And then you can show, if it is Uttarakhand, you can show this area, right? If it is in Jammu and Kashmir or Ladakh, we can show this areas. So this is how, draw them less than 5 seconds. Rough draw, not perfect. If you draw perfect, then your marks will be reduced. You should always make a rough draw. It should be very fast. Don't invest more than 30 seconds on your maps. You should practice them. Draw the maps in 15 seconds, 20 seconds. See, hardly it is a line factor where you can put them into images. Right. Right. Now, disaster management continuum. Now understand here. So when we talk about the disasters, so these disasters, we can classify them into two categories. All the disasters, we can classify them into two categories. One is natural disaster, and the second one is man-made disaster. Man-made disaster. Now, natural disaster, you can't stop. Earthquakes, volcanic activities, you can't stop. Like earthquakes and all, which occur naturally because of many factors, you can't stop. But when it comes to man-made, when it comes to man-made events, so we can avoid them. We can avoid them, or we can stop them. If we are unable to avoid, if we are unable to avoid them, or if we are unable to stop, if we are unable to stop, if we are unable to avoid them, then we can reduce or mitigate. If unable to stop or avoid, both natural as well as the man-made. If unable to stop or avoid, we can reduce or mitigate. Reduce or mitigate. Use the words appropriately. We can reduce or mitigate. We can reduce or mitigate severity and intensity of the natural disaster or any disaster. Intensity and severity of disaster. We can reduce or mitigate the intensity and severity of disaster. How? By proper management. It can be done by effective management, effective management and continuous process. Effective management and continuous process. So by which we can reduce the intensity and severity of disaster. Now this continuous process, which includes of three major phases or three key phases. Which consist of three key phases, which are subdivided into 6 actions, which are subdivided into 6 main activities. So this you should keep in the mind. So what is disaster management continuum? So we have natural disasters, we have man-made disasters. So we can avoid the man-made disasters by regulating, by restricting, by imposing fines and penalties, by using strong acts, by making the technology in such a way that the errors are reduced. So we can reduce the man-made, or we can stop that. But in spite of that, if accidents occurs in the man-made, or if things happen in the natural disasters, only way is you can reduce or mitigate their severity. You can reduce the number of deaths. You can reduce the injuries which are happening. You can reduce the collapsing of the buildings. How? By effective management and continuous process. Effective management means technologies, awareness. It means that by increasing their capacities, effective management is done by increasing their capacities, increasing capacity and decreasing. So what should be the appropriate word? Increasing capacity and decreasing. What should be the appropriate word? Effective management means you should increase their capacity, and decreases. Can anybody define the word? Increasing the capacity and decreasing. So rather than intensity, we say decreasing vulnerability. Perfect, Komal. Decreasing vulnerability. Perfect. Perfect, Sakshi. Perfect. So this is how you have to write your answers. I hope it is clear now, right? So the disaster management continuum cycle talks about increasing their capacities. So capacity means the holistic approach, decreasing the vulnerabilities, and by that, you can reduce, mitigate intensity and severity of disaster. So this is what you should remember. Is it clear? And what are the three key phases? These are pre-disaster, at the time, and post-disaster. So this is the first key, pre-disaster. And this is the second, at the time of disaster. And this is the third one, which we refer them as post-disaster recovery. Now, in the context of pre-disaster risk reduction phase, which is managed, risk or crisis? And in the post-disaster, which is managed, risk or crisis? Two terms. In the pre-disaster management, which is managed, risk or crisis? Perfect. So here we talk about it is risk management, and in the context of post, it talks about crisis management. Risk management and crisis management. Perfect. And this is at the time of event, when the disaster has happened. So pre-disaster talks about preparedness, mitigation, prevention. Post-disaster talks about response, recovery, and rehabilitation of them. Now here, you should understand that the very first approach in the pre-disaster is prevention. Prevent in the beginning itself. So prevention is better than cure. Prevention is better than cure. So prevent that event in the beginning itself. In the beginning itself. It is something like this. During COVID, use the mask. Use the mask and maintain social distances. We refer that as prevention. Preventive measures, so that it will not happen. Preventive measures. Now, in spite of prevention, there is possibility that the event can occur. Then we refer that as mitigation. Mitigation. It is taking the steps, like in the context of COVID, vaccination, or providing proper knowledge-based activities. So something which is not prevented, we need certain structural measures, which are referred as mitigation. Now, those activities which cannot be handled by prevention and mitigation, so they can be done by preparedness. So they can be done by preparedness, which cannot be done by mitigation, cannot be done by preventions, can be done by preparedness. Like arrangement of the hospitals during COVID, that is called as preparedness. Making sure shot that everybody is getting the doses of vaccination, that is preparedness. Making sure that all the necessity aspects of the quarantines are done properly, that is called as preparedness. So these are the three aspects of the pre-disaster management. That is, it talks about prevention, outright avoidance in the initial stage itself, prevent them, then mitigate them, if not mitigate them, lessening or minimizing the adverse impact. And they are always long-term perspectives. Long-term perspectives. In spite of prevention and mitigation, there is possibility that the event can occur. In spite of vaccination also, there is possibility that COVID has affected. After that, we refer that as the third stage called as preparedness, where the knowledge and capacities of the government, structures, awareness, everything is included, which talks about increasing the capacity. Increasing the capacity. That's what I told you. Increasing the capacities of government, people involved, communities, individuals, etc., by providing them proper training, in first aid, providing them proper kits, the kits which are required during the event. So all these we refer them as preparedness. So these are the three stages of preparedness. Pre-disaster management: prevention, mitigation, preparedness. Now in the pre-disaster management, there are certain disasters. Not all disasters. There are certain disasters like cyclones, like floods, like droughts, etc., which are referred as extreme weather-based disaster, or which are associated with the climatic factor. Cyclones, floods, droughts, etc. And for these weather-based or climate-based natural disasters, early warning system plays an important role. For these, early warning system plays an important role. Now take an example of earthquake. In the earthquake, you can identify which area is vulnerable for earthquake. We can't say when the earthquake will occur here. So nobody predicted that April 3rd, the Taiwan will experience earthquake. But everybody knew that Taiwan is vulnerable for earthquake because it is in the region of Pacific Ring of Fire. So during the events called as earthquake, we know that that region is vulnerable for earthquake, but we don't know when it will occur. Occurrence is not possible. So hence, early warning system cannot be created for the event called as earthquake, volcanoes, etc. We can't develop early warning system in that. But if it is cyclone, floods, droughts, early warning systems can be created or developed. And what is the importance of early warning system? The moment when you give the early warning system, some 2 days early, 3 days early, they will prepare all the necessity things by which you can reduce the impact of hazards there. So early warning system is a very important factor in the pre-disaster management of weather-based, climate-based natural disasters, not like what we refer them as earthquake. Now, if you're reading your current affairs, every day you come across one region called as San Andreas in US. So the San Andreas is a region where we find the Pacific plate and the North American plate are moving transform. And they are telling that the San Andreas plate or San Andreas fault is vulnerable for the major earthquake. It is known that that area will have an earthquake, but they can't predict when the earthquake will happen. It may be today, It may be after 10 days or it may be after 30 years. You don't know the exact time when the earthquake can happen. So you can't create any early warning system for the events like earthquakes. But there are many events like cyclones, floods, droughts, where these are referred as weather-based phenomenon, and for that we can create early warning systems. For them, we are having early warning systems. And these early warning systems are very significant so that the communities prepare in the short period of a time. So that the community will prepare themselves in the short period of a time. So whatever medical facilities are there, they will arrange. Food facilities, they will arrange. They will move from that areas. Resettlement can be done. Shifting can be done, so that the impact of the hazard is less. So early warning system plays an important role, so that they can prepare. Now this early warning system is calculated based on knowledge of the risk, the coastal people, the mountain peoples, how they will be affected. Then monitoring and analysis of forecasting hazard. So understand that risk management talks about monitoring, analysis of the hazard. Then only you can put them. So the same thing, monitoring and forecasting of the previous data. Then communication and alert warning is done. And this is done by many apps. It is done by many apps. Like Sagarvani app is there. In the mobiles, we find alert apps have been there from National Disaster Management Authority. So many times they check them. You will have vibrations on your mobiles. And in that vibration, they will send a message that how this is disseminated. So many apps will be there. Apps will be there where they will send the information. They will send the information. Like Sagarvani app. Example, Sagarvani app. Right. So this is something where you have to be very careful. And also, we are launching many satellites. We have launched many satellites. And through these satellites, we collect the data. And then we will send them for making forecasting. Right. Then it also depends on the local capabilities to respond. Awareness is also very, very important. By that, they can be making a very effective early warning system. So effective early warning system is very, very important. Effective early warning system is very, very important, so that it will reduce the impact of the hazard. See, in the context of earthquake, we are developing. We don't have any technologies. Till now, we don't have technologies. So in the context of earthquake, it is preparedness rather than early warning system. So that's why if any question is there in the earthquake, so in the earthquake, they will never say early warning system. They will say, what is the preparedness? How you are prepared for that? Earthquake, it is preparedness. Right. So in the pre-disaster management, when you talk about earthquake, it is about preparedness, how you are prepared, what type of structures you have created, what type of awareness you have created, what type of shelters you have constructed. So we refer that as preparedness. Preparedness. Is that clear? So we don't have early warning system in the earthquake, but we can have the pre-disaster management in the form of preparedness. Right. Now, during the disaster phase, when the events have occurred, so we have to perform something called as medical facilities, food facilities, kit facilities. We refer them as critical facilities. Critical facilities. Now, the idea of providing critical facilities like medicines, food, water, shelter, etc., so that the injuries will not convert into death. So all these are to reduce injuries or reduce the deaths. Reduce the death. Proper medication, proper food, proper thing. So this is what we refer them as during disaster phase, which talk about search and rescue. If any earthquake has occurred, find if any animal is within the debris, if any human beings are within the debris, search them and rescue them. Search them and rescue them. It may be landslide, it may be any type of earthquake, or it can be any type of event. Search, so search is of both human as well as animals in that region. So very simple. This is called as providing them critical facilities or emergency response. So pre-disaster, and this is during the disaster. So in spite of this, the losses have occurred. We refer that as crisis management. So this talks about crisis management. Now in the crisis management, what you have to do? Already the destruction has occurred. You should restore that very fast. So we refer that as, it talks about rehabilitation. Rehabilitation means providing them livelihood facilities as fast as possible, providing them work facilities so that they can have their own food. So rehabilitation means providing them livelihood, or prepare the activity so that they can start working, so that their food and other things are not destroyed. So livelihood means you are providing them capacity to have the accessibility to the food. So always remember, rehabilitation means it talks about livelihood, right? So it can be in a week or a month, so that the building is started, their activity started, so that their earning will provide them a good amount of food to them. That is called as rehabilitation. After rehabilitation, we have to talk about recovery and reconstruction. So this will take a longer period of time. So reconstruction, sometimes when we say the house has been damaged, so if you keep on constructing the house without livelihood, how they will survive? So first thing is you have to make food availability to them, employment opportunities, then the reconstruction. So generally we refer that as reconstruction and rehabilitation. Reconstruction and rehabilitation, home as well as food availability. Rehabilitation. So reconstruction without the rehabilitation has no sense. Reconstruction without rehabilitation has no sense. You are constructed a home, you have transferred them, but from where you will give them food? They need certain livelihood actions. So hence rehabilitation is also very, very important compared to recovery and reconstruction, right? So hence these three terms are very, very important: resettlement, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. Please remember that. I hope it is clear the difference between rehabilitation and reconstruction. There is a huge difference between reconstruction, rehabilitation. Resettlement means you have destroyed, the hazard has destroyed a home or house. You have constructed a house in some other areas. We refer that as resettlement, or we refer that as reconstruction. Rehabilitation means whatever economic activity which has destroyed there, you re-establish that or provide some other source by which he can earn food for himself. We refer that as rehabilitation. So both are very, very important. Rehabilitation, food and the home. So something we refer them as roti and makan. So rehabilitation will give them roti and kapda, and reconstruction will give them makan. So this talks about roti and kapda, and this will give them makan. And I think both, all the three are important, right? So human beings always struggle for roti, kapda, and makan. Is that clear now? So we refer that as rehabilitation and reconstruction. Then whenever when you're talking about these, you should always remember that this reconstruction will always take longer term. Longer term will be there, right? And they all are based on existing strategies, policies, and collaborative approach. integrated approach. Collaborative means many will combine. Government, NGOs, individual. Integrated. Integration of different ministries. Integration means integration of different ministry. Then also center, state, and local. Ministries means your ministries of fisheries are there, ministries of agriculture, ministries of mines, ministries of railways. So integrating of them, they should coordinate with each other. They should coordinate with each other. Then only these things can be done in the proper way. So please use the vocabulary as best as possible. Right. So the terms are very important in the context of any type of disaster management. Right. Now, next we move on to understand the first type of disaster called as the floods. Right. So in geography, you have studied about the flood. So how do you define a flood? So there is a definition by which you can define a flood. Right. Now, before moving down to the flood, you should always remember that in the context of India, out of 329 million hectares, this data you should always fix in the mind. Out of 329 million hectares, 40 million hectares or 12% is vulnerable to floods. 12% is vulnerable to floods. So this data you should fix in the mind. Should fix in the mind. Right. Now, how do you define a flood? It is submergence of a new land which is not covered by the water, or increase in the water level in already submerged land. We refer that as a flood if it is temporary or the water which is there for a longer period of a time. So it is submergence of a new land, submergence of a new land, or increase in the depth of partially submerged land. Already it is submerged, increasing in the level of that due to increase of the water, maybe due to rainfall or maybe due to inundation. We refer them as the floods. We refer them as the floods. Now, in the context of India, National Disaster Management Authority has given the two reasons for the floods in India. One is referred as natural reason, and the second one is man-made reasons in India. So what are natural reasons for the floods in the context of India? Yes, state of high water level along the river channel. So any area wherever the water increase is there, we refer that as flooding. Any area, yes, river area or anything. So it is just about increasing the level of water. Right. What are the natural reasons for the floods in the context of right? So India. So one is heavy precipitation. We refer that as heavy precipitation, heavy rainfall, or we say cloud bursting. Cloud bursting. So both you can add heavy precipitation or cloud bursting, you can say. Second one is maybe due to storms or cyclones in the coastal areas. Storm or cyclones in the coastal areas. So we find the coastal areas are also vulnerable in that, right? Then we also have certain incidences where the river changes its courses. River changing its course. Now, can you give any example where the changing of river creates floods in that state? Changing of the river creates floods in that river. Yes. So Kosi is referred as sorrow of Bengal. Example, Kosi is referred as sorrow of Bengal. Sorrow of Bihar. Right. So we find such incidences where due to heavy precipitation, storms or cyclones, or the rivers changing their courses, they are referred as natural factors for many other but natural factors. Now, what are man-made factors? Now, in the context of man-made factors which are associated with them are, so generally when we construct a dam, if this is a dam which is constructed, understand this is a dam which is constructed, and here the river is flowing in this direction. So because of the dam construction, so this region we will find high siltation. This dam will act as a barrier, so here it will make the siltation. This is A part, this is B part. Siltation. So whenever the siltation has occurred in the A and in the B, we find sediments are stopped by the barrier. So which water will be shallow? A water will be shallow, or B area will be shallow, or which area will be still having deep water? B region of a river or A region is having. So A will be having shallow waters or deep waters. A will be having shallow water or deep waters. A part will have shallow waters and B will be having deep waters. Right. Now in this condition, where you will find the floods is inevitable, in A or in B, in the shallow water or in the deep water during heavy rainfall. Right. So where do you find the flood is inevitable? So that is called as man-made. So this A region will have flood. This is called as the man-made impact on that. So all the areas will be flooded by this during rainfall. We refer that as dam as one of the major factor for that. Apart from that, when we talk about large amount of deforestation, so they will reduce the flow of a water. Huge amount of water will accumulate in the lowland areas, or large amount of debris, the silt will come and deposit in the river, which will make the river again shallow. So we refer that as deforestation, which will increase the volume of the accumulation of water, right? So we refer them as dam factor, deforestation part. Then third, if you have taken the example of say taken consideration in Chennai. Right. In the Chennai region, we have three important water bodies are there, right? So one is the Kuam River, then we are having Adyar River, and then we are having Buckingham Canal. So Chennai city, we always find Kuam, Adyar, and Buckingham canals are there. Now, during the summer season, the volume of water may not be high. But what we do is, whenever the building construction is done, so we demolish the old building, and these debris we throw in these water bodies where the river or the water becomes shallow. So the third one is throwing of the debris or siltation. In the water sources where they will make the water shallow, and this will make the problem. And this is also seen in the context of Mumbai also. So we have seen this in Mumbai also. In Mumbai also we find that maybe due to siltation or maybe due to illegal encroachment of water bodies. Where their natural flow is disrupted. And this we have seen in Mumbai, where we find debris are thrown, plus illegal encroachment is done in the Mumbai. Now, three famous lakes are there in the Mumbai. And these three lakes are Tulsi, Vihar, and Powai. Tulsi, Vihar, and Powai. Now, these three lakes, they are interconnected from where the water of surplus lake moves to another, and from there to another. So proper channelization was done. Now, 30% of the Tulsi Lake is encroached for construction activities. 30% of lakes in Bihar is encroached for setting up of industries. Certain areas are illegally encroached for setting up of certain types of construction activities. So hence, we don't have proper channelization of the water, which can reach to the river, and from there it can reach to the ocean. We are disrupting the flow of water, and hence we find incidences of floods in Mumbai are dominant because of such factors. Tulsi, Bihar, Powai, which are seen as one of the criteria there. So hence, NDMA says that there are two reasons for the floods. One is natural, and second one is man-made factors, which are also responsible for the floods. Encroachments means acquiring that area in the coastal regions of these wetlands. So please remember these man-made as well as the natural factors. Right. Now, if you see the flood-prone areas in India, again, National Disaster Management Authority (NDMA), National Disaster Management Authority, has divided the India into different zones based on the incidences of floods which takes place there. Now, the first region is referred as most frequent and intensive flooding, where average every year, here we find average flooding is 4 to 6 weeks. So 4 to 6 weeks average flooding is seen in that areas. And these areas are referred as most frequent and intensive flooding, 4 to 6 weeks. And these areas, examples are the Ganga and Brahmaputra regions. Ganga and Brahmaputra area. Right. Then second one is less frequent and intensive flooding, where we find the average flooding is 2 to 4 weeks. 2 to 4 weeks every year. We refer that as less frequent and intensive flooding. And this is seen in entire Bay of Bengal. This is a region, entire Bay of Bengal. Plus the Narmada and Tapi River. And Tapi River. The third one is least frequent and intensive flooding, where we find the average flooding is less than 2 weeks. On yearly basis. And these regions are the regions of Satluj and Yamuna, and also the rivers of Kerala coast called as Malabar rivers. Malabar region. Right. So these are the different zones which were created. We refer them as flood prone areas or flood prone zones of India. But a deliberate change was introduced. This is due to the event of 2005. In the year 2005, Mumbai received heavy rainfall and entire city was flooded. Entire city was flooded because of heavy rainfall. And then they found that the reason for this is totally different. The reason is totally different, which is totally different from all other areas. Impact is also different. And the measures to control that is also totally different. So hence, as the reasons, as the impacts which they're seen in the Mumbai are totally different. They're not same as what they have seen in the rural areas. And hence they decided that we will introduce a new zone which is called as urban floods. So hence a new zone was introduced in the year 2007, which is called as the urban floods. Urban floods. So hence, if you take the present scenarios in the year 2024, or if you're writing any answers in today, entire India is divided into 4 flood zones: 1, 2, 3, plus urban floods. Urban floods like Gurugram, Bangalore, Delhi floods, Chennai floods, Mumbai floods, etc. Mumbai floods, etc. So we can define them as the urban floods, right? So please remember this. So this is how the present classification is done in the context of National Disaster Management Authority. So please remember this map. Practice this map 1 time, 2 time, 3 times. It becomes very easy. Practice that. Sometimes they may ask in geography, write a note on the flood prone areas of India. So these are referred as flood prone areas of India. Right. Now, as I told, urban floods. Now, the moment when we say urban floods, understand, it is the submergence of usually dry land or heavy rainfall due to melting of the glacier, etc. We refer them as the urban floods. Urban flood areas, generally we say areas like Mumbai, like Chennai, right, or Gurugram, Bangalore, etc. We refer them as urban floods. Right. Now, here the incidence of urban floods are increasing. The incidence of urban floods are increasing. Now, why they are increasing? Why they are increasing? If you see the Indian census, if you take a data of 1951 and 2011, 2011 and 1951, if you take the areas of rural and urban, are they same? If you take the data of rural and urban in 1950 and 2011 census, are they same? The area wise, the people who are staying in the rural or the lands which are there in the urban. So rural and urban, are they same? No. Why? So which area has increased? Which area has increased from 1951 to 2011? Which area has increased? Rural area has increased or urban areas are increased? Which area has increased? This is common sense, right? So urban areas are increased. Why? Because many areas are now classified as urban because they are satisfying certain conditions. So hence, naturally, as the urban areas are increased, then the urban floods will also increase. So that is the first one. So it is increasing because of natural increase in the area. Increase in area. Very important. So area under urban settlements in India has increased. This is only from 10 years. So if you take 1951 to now, it has been more. That is one. Second one is because of large amount of unplanned urbanization. So we find that in the context of India, the urbanization is pseudo urbanization or false urbanization, over urbanization or pseudo urbanization. Right. So we don't have strong pull factor, it is strong push factor. Strong push factors are there, which are making huge impact on the urban areas. Right. So because of that, we find the urban floods have been increased due to natural increase in area and population. So population has also increased, over urbanization, pseudo urbanization, and strong factor. Pseudo means false urbanization because of the strong push factor. We don't have proper facilities. It seems to be urban, but it does not looks like, where we find slums are dominant, where we find basic infrastructures are collapsing. So we refer that as pseudo urbanization. If you see different countries, so where we find a good amount of urbanization is there, but in context of India, we find this is urbanization but with less amenities. So that's why in India we find dominated by slums, dominated by the slums. So these all are your social issues, social issues. So you should be knowing that, over urbanization and all. So hence the incidences of the urban floods have increased in India. Plus, what about the infrastructures? Are they same? They have also increased. So we find infrastructures have also increased. So all these are responsible for large amount of urban cities and converting into the urban floods. Now, here we find increases. If you see or if you read the urban floods, increase in the flood peaks from 1 to 8 times and volume up to 6 times. It means there is a sudden increase in the water. Sudden increase in the water due to heavy precipitation. Heavy precipitation. Apart from that, in these urban areas, we don't have proper drainage. So accumulation takes place. No proper drainage system. Now this is very simple. In the rainy season, if you visit Chennai, the roads will be blocked. The water which has there after rainfall, where is the drainage system? Where the water moves? It can't. So accumulation of water will take place. In Mumbai, the same condition. In Bangalore, the same conditions. The drainage have been blocked out. So huge amount of water, rather than moving outside, it will accumulate there. It will accumulate there because no proper drainage. Plus, we don't have the percolation of water. All urban areas have concrete jungles. So no percolation of water. So concrete roads. After heavy rainfall, the water will not seepage. No seepage of water. Because these concrete roads, they are non-permeable. They will not allow the water to pass. So non-permeable roads. So hence, huge accumulation of water takes place in the urban areas. And that too occurs very quickly, half an hour, 1 hour, because of all these conditions. All the water, instead of diverting, it will converge and accumulate. The water will converge and accumulate. Why? Because there is no diversion itself. It will accumulate in the lowland areas. Then, denser population and the slums. So in the urban areas, we find the densities are more and slums are there. Why? Because of pseudo urbanization, because of strong push factor. So hence, denser population and slums, the vulnerability is not Same. So high vulnerability. High vulnerability. And this high vulnerability will bring huge losses. Right? Denser population means if 1,000 people are there, deaths will always be more. Then economic activities. In the context of urban areas, we find it is associated with industries, software industries, manufacturing industries, etc. And these industries, these industries, they always have huge economic investments. And whenever floods, storms occurs there, then entire activity is destroyed. So during the floods, entire activity is destroyed. Then vital infrastructures are affected. So vital infrastructures affected means here, the moment when the rainfall has occurred there, electricity will be disrupted. No electricity. Right. Second, the roads will be blocked. So hence, you can't reach to the hospitals. You can't reach to any time. So hospitals, etc., will be less functioning. Hospitals, they will not be functioning because you don't have electricity. How long you can run with the artificial one? So electricity is affected, road blocks are there, hospitals are there. So whenever such events are there, whenever the roads are there, hospitals are blocked, so basic necessities will not be reached. Basic necessity will not reach in time. Plus, as the hospitals itself are not working, so casualties will increase. Casualties will increase, and this will make huge losses there. So hence, in the context of urban floods, these incidences makes the urban flood as different from rural floods. So that's why we say urban floods are different from rural flood. Different from rural flood. And hence, they need a separate type of management. Right. So hence, we need separate management perspectives on that. So that's why we created a separate zone for urban floods from the year 2007. Right. So this is some rough idea about the urban floods and their incidences. Right now, the reasons for the floods, same: heavy rainfall, storm surges. Now, what do you mean by storm surges? So generally, these storm surges, they occur in the coastal areas. They occur in the coastal areas. Now, what is a storm surge? In a very simple term, this is a land or coastal area, and here we find the water bodies are there: ocean, or we say a sea. Now, during a cyclone or depression, low pressure is created. During a cyclone or depression, low pressure is created. Now, whenever low pressure is created, winds will converge towards that or diverge from low pressure. Whenever low pressure is created, in the low pressure, winds will converge or diverge from the low pressure. This is your basics of geography. In the low pressure, the winds will converge or the winds will diverge from the low pressure areas. We all know that winds will move from high pressure to low pressure. So in the low pressure areas, the winds will converge. The winds will converge. So wind always moves from high pressure to low pressure. Please remember this. So high pressure is a divergence area. and low pressure is convergence area. This is your basic geography, man. If you are not good in geography, then how you will write the concepts? So high pressure means diverging, low pressure means converging. So that's why we say cyclone is a low pressure area. So as the low pressure is created, converging takes place, and this conversion makes the increase in the water level in that area. So this area, the water level increases, and this, when it reaches to the coastal, this elevated dome like water, because of low pressure, when it enters into the coastal areas, we refer that as storm surges. Low pressure which accumulates the water, so the water level increases here, and that creates the storm surges. So please remember this. Then we have something called as sudden release of water from the reservoirs. So during monsoon, when they release the water from the reservoir, then that will add more water. So that will add more water, which makes the urban areas more dangerous. Right. So this is seen in the context of many example. If you can take about the Adyar city in Chennai, right? So in Adyar, more specifically in Chennai, so the Chambarambakam reservoirs. So when it is release water, the Chambarambakam reservoir, during the monsoon, when it releases the extra water which is accumulated during the northeast monsoon, it will make flooding in the Adyar region. Then global warming and climate change. I have already explained this. Due to global warming and climate change, we find the water expands, plus sea level increases because of melting of the glacier, plus due to global warming, the moisture holding capacity increases, and this also affected precipitation patterns. It has affected precipitation patterns. Then unplanned urbanization, like debris throwing, unnecessary infrastructures constructed, no proper drainage systems, accumulation of water takes place, encroachment of natural sinks like the lakes, ponds, etc. So when you encroach them, the natural flow is disrupted. Natural flow is disrupted. Then throwing the debris, which makes the water shallow. Then no accountability. We don't have any accountability in the urban management. If you visit one department, they say it does not comes under me. Please visit some other. So no proper accountability. Geology of that area. Sometimes if you see that region, it may be having hard rock or non-permeable rocks. So non-permeable rocks will not allow the water to pass through, and this can trigger floods in that areas. Now, next is demographic and environmental changes, where due to increasing of the population, we have destroyed many mangroves. Or many coastal areas. In the river valleys also, we have destroyed many banks. Where the floods have become inevitable. So we refer them as demographic and environmental changes. Storm surges are smaller version of cyclones. So cyclones can bring storm surges. They're not similar, but the methodology in the storm surge is accumulation of water. So sometimes storm surge can be accompanied with the cyclone, but during the cyclone always heavy rainfalls are there. But during the storm surges, there is no possibility of saying that rainfall will occur. So there is no condition. So it is something like this. So storm surge can accompany with the cyclone. And in the cyclone, there is always heavy rainfall. Cyclones will make landfall and bring rainfall, which can be accompanied by storm surges. But storm surges do not provide rainfall. They may not provide rainfall because it is huge depression which accumulated water increase in the level, it is moving like this. So it is something like this. It is a filled bucket of water you are pouring on something. We refer that as storm surge, right? And cyclone means along with that huge water is in the form of precipitation. So this is a difference between cyclone and the storm surges. So tomorrow we'll continue from where we talk about impacts on that. Encroachment of natural sinks means encroachment of lakes. So big lakes are there. So in the lakes, you are encroached and you are constructed buildings there. You are constructed residential areas. We refer them as encroachment. Now, when the encroachment is done, generally in the rainy season, generally in the rainy seasons, when this lake is filled, the water moves from here and reaches to one more lake. So all the water bodies are interconnected. Now, when you construct them for flats or when you construct them for introductions or industries, then this interlinkage is stopped. When this will have flooding like conditions. So we refer that as encroachment of the illegal bodies. Is that clear? See, you take up all these contents, you prepare notes, and then from that notes, check word limits, and based on that you can write. So while making the notes, please don't miss any terminologies, because whatever I am giving you, they are limited and they are very important. Don't miss any terminologies. Read them carefully, write them carefully, one time, two times. So make one notes, read them, and make notes. After that, revise. So it is only one time reading, then revision follows. Read them one time, make a notes. After that, you revise the notes, again rewrite them. So that's how you gain confidence in your writing capacities. So please go with every word that you spend some 1 hour extra to make the notes for the first time, then you go with those perspectives. Is it clear? So regarding the boiler explosion, we will take up when I talk about human errors and all, right? So these are the things which you should remember in the context of your preparation. Regarding that, Vaibhav, you can take my mail ID from SMEs, and if any genuine concern is there regarding my subject, I'll revert back. If it is ecology, environment, and disaster management, or anything with geography, I'll revert back to that. Right? Yes, not in detail, but at least something. You have to read them at least, so that you can see. It is a skill of writing. If the question is asked for 150 words, then you have to explain it less. If it is for 200 words, you should elaborate. So first you gain a confidence by reading them. I have explained them in detail, so that 30% or 40% you will make a memory of that. Is it clear? So this is what you have to talk about that. I don't know about the classes and all. I am a faculty where I'll be taking the classes for ecology, environment, is it disaster management. So I'll just check with them regarding the classes and all. I'll let you know why they may be with reference to that, right? So this is, if you are having any doubts with the geography, ecology, environment, and disaster management, with reference to subject and these, I can communicate you very fast. But some technical issues, what you are highlighted, I'll communicate that to the concerned person, so they will make all the arrangement to settle it out. See, when we talk about the books and all, so in the context of ecology and environment, if you attended my class, those PPTs are sufficient. Plus you can read NCERT books of class 11th and 12th and current affairs. I can assure you that is more than sufficient. And some students have asked me about books like Sankar IAS or Kuller and all. So all the books will be having the same content. And I have taken the PPTs referring all the good books, and accumulation has been done. So you can read the PPTs, you can go with the PPTs, and wherever you are having any doubts in that, you can refer any standard book. It can be Kuller book, it can be Sankar IAS book, any book you can refer and use them in filling the gaps there. Don't read entire book. It will be time consuming. Again, in the context of disaster management also, I have given elaborate explanation about all the topics and terminologies. Make a proper notes of these things that will help you to read and understand. So if you keep on reading, then what is the difference between reading books and attending the classes? So here I am giving you a squeezed content of all the things. So use the PPT as a reference point, and wherever when you are missing the linkages, you make a reference of any standard textbook or access to the net, and keep it up to the point. Don't make research on that. So I can again tell you that PPTs will help you a lot in the context of your preparation strategies. Is it clear? Yes, PPTs, current affairs, and wherever any term which are missing there, whenever which is missing there, you can read them. If you go through the previous year question papers, you will find that. You will find that. So the idea of in-depth analysis is that once the terms becomes clear to you, then you don't have to run behind them for by hearting. So that's where I am making all my efforts to explain them in detailed, so that you should not by heart the terminologies. If you have seen the today's class, I started with hazard. I told you about something called as a disaster, how they are different from each other. Then we made an effort in understanding vulnerability. Then why vulnerabilities? Then capacities. What are capacities? Right? What is risk? What is crisis? What is pre-disaster? What is post-disaster? Why India is vulnerable? What is vulnerability profile of India? What are different types of hazards in India? So if you spend your 2 hours, 3 hours in today's class, after this, if you spend 2 hours, 3 hours reading every slide word by word, I don't think you will have any difficulty in writing anything. And these are limited resources, compiled resources. Trust me, they will help you in writing any type of questions you get in your UPSC. Trust me that these contents are sufficient for you to write. And this is collaborative from current affairs. You have to read them with patience. You have to read them with your patience. A best person is one who make the best utilization of resources. Whatever resources are available with you, you accumulate that. You accumulate that. That will give you best results in your life. It's not about this. It's about in the life. Whatever resources are there, you fight with the resources. That will help you. That will make you to emerge as a leader in your fight. Right. So whenever you are reading, so please read them. And regarding the mail ID, I'll tell them to share. If they are not sharing, then I'll give my mail ID. Right. So don't worry. Still 5 more days are there. Still 4 more days are there. I'll ask them to share them, and I have told them about something, whatever you have given here. So I'll share with them. I'll ask them to incorporate those things, and we'll meet up tomorrow. And in spite of that also, if there is nothing where the mail has been shared, I'll be there to share the mail IDs. And understand that if anything is concerned with ecology, disaster management, and geography, I'll be there to help you out in the context of that part. Right. So till then, take care. We'll meet up tomorrow again. Thank you.